All right, today on The Explainer, we're diving into a concept called spiritual amnesia. And, it's a kind of forgetting that might hit closer to home than you think.
I mean, come on, we've all been there, right? You walk into the kitchen, you open the fridge door, and poof, it's gone. You have absolutely no idea why you're standing there. It's a little frustrating, sure, but in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty harmless.
But what if the thing you forgot wasn't what you were doing, but who you are? Now that's a much more dangerous kind of forgetting, isn't it?
And that's exactly what spiritual amnesia is. It's when you lose that core memory, the story that tells you who you are, what your purpose is, and where you belong. And when that foundation cracks, well, the fallout can be massive.
So in this explainer, we're going to walk through this idea. We'll look at what made it so fatal in the first place. We'll dive into the core story of Israel that it completely wrecked, see the consequences of that forgetting, and then we'll see how a brand new story offers a parallel for us today, showing why remembering who you are is everything.
Okay, first up, a fatal spiritual amnesia. Let's get right to the heart of it by asking a pretty basic but really deep question.
So if I were to ask you right now, who are you? What's your go-to answer? For most of us, right, we immediately reach for these external labels. I'm a teacher, or I'm an engineer. Or maybe it's about status. I'm the wealthiest person in my town. Or even the stuff we own. I'm the guy with the Lamborghini.
But here's the thing about those definitions. They're all pretty flimsy, aren't they? The core argument we're looking at today is that the most solid, the most important definition of who you are, it's not based on how you see yourself or even how others see you. It's about how God sees you.
And you know what? This is not some new 21st century problem. Thousands of years ago, the prophet Jeremiah basically diagnosed this exact same thing in the people of Israel. He looked at them and said, "You have spiritual amnesia." He saw it as this fatal disease where they had just completely forgotten the foundational story that connected them to God.
So what was this story? What was this big foundational thing they forgot? Well, it wasn't just a bunch of random tales. This was the central narrative that literally forged their identity as a people.
It all boils down to this one epic story, the Exodus, which you can see in 4 key stages. First, they were slaves in Egypt, total nobodies, with zero status, zero hope. Then bam, this miraculous liberation. God literally parts the Red Sea to rescue them. After that, they're in the wilderness, where they're stripped of everything and have to learn to depend on God for their next meal, their next drink of water. And it all culminates at Mount Sinai, where they're given the law, a blueprint for how to live as a free, chosen people, a whole new identity.
And this amazing story, it did 2 incredibly important things. First, it answered the question, so, who is God? And the answer was clear. He's a God who shows up in human history, a God who keeps his promises, one who is full of both mercy and power. He's a redeemer, a liberator.
And just as critical, the story answered their question, okay, so who are we? And the answer was a game changer. Suddenly they weren't slaves anymore. They were a people rescued by God, a chosen nation, people with a purpose, called to be a blessing. Their entire identity got a total reboot.
But what happens when a memory that powerful starts to fade? That brings us to the pretty dire consequences of forgetting this story.
See, when Israel got this spiritual amnesia, their whole identity got scrambled. They forgot they were this special, chosen people, and they just started acting like everyone else. They started worshiping other gods like Baal, and they ignored the very rules that were designed to help them live well. Jeremiah used this incredible metaphor to describe what they'd done. He said they had turned their backs on God, who he called the spring of living water, right? An infinite, life-giving source. And what did they trade it for? Broken cisterns. These cracked, leaky water tanks they tried to build for themselves. They were totally self-made, and they could never actually hold water. They could never satisfy. And that's the bottom line, isn't it? Forgetting your core story, your real identity, will always lead to a broken way of life. When you don't know who you are, you will inevitably try to fill that emptiness with your own broken cisterns, and they just never, ever work.
Now, what's so fascinating is that this ancient story, this ancient pattern, doesn't just stay in the past, it actually creates this powerful parallel for the Christian story today.
Just look at the pattern here on this table. It's almost identical. In both stories, you have this same fundamental movement, from slavery to liberation, from being lost to having divine guidance, and from having no identity to being given a new one as God's people.
So this new story,
The one centered on Jesus, it does the exact same thing as the first one. It answers those two huge fundamental questions. Who is God and who are we? It tells believers that they are redeemed, they are rescued, and they are adopted as children of God.
Okay, and this brings us to our final and maybe most important point. Why remembering this story, this identity, isn't just some mental exercise. It's absolutely crucial for how we actually live our lives.
So this begs a really tough question, doesn't it? Can believers today get spiritual amnesia? I mean, is it possible for this incredible story to just fade into the background, for our faith to become nothing more than a habit, a tradition, or maybe even just a fashion accessory?
To make this really practical, the source tells this great story about a mentor they called Uncle Peter. Now, Uncle Peter was a successful dentist, right? A guy with high social standing. But his true identity wasn't in his job title. For decades, you could see it in his humble service. He was the guy picking up international students from the airport at all hours of the night, just to make sure they had a warm meal and a welcome.
He was literally living out his identity as someone who had been shown incredible grace. And his advice, his motto, wasn't about getting something back. It was about paying forward the grace he'd received. He'd always say, "You do it unto others as you do it unto the Lord Jesus Christ." That is what it looks like to remember who you are.
So in the end, forgetting who you are is a recipe for a broken life. But remembering, well, that's just the starting line. The real adventure begins when that identity starts to shape every single thing you do. So the final question isn't just who are you, it's what story is God writing through you